Hello, everybody. Esoteric Eddie here. Namaste. Welcome to another Esoteric Spotlight where I briefly talk about interesting subjects in a laid back manner. Just want to say thank you to everybody who's been supporting and watching the recent content. Thank you for rocking with me. For today's episode, we're going to be briefly going over sleep paralysis and what it might be. I'm going to be going over some brief notes that I took from various online sources about what sleep paralysis is in the medical field, or at least what we've concluded it is, along with some interesting things that different cultures have thought it to be over the centuries. And afterwards, I'm going to tell you three different stories. A story that I thought was interesting from a famous rapper that I grew up listening to, and also my personal story, or at least one of my personal stories with sleep paralysis, and an interesting story that happened to my brother while I was sleeping next to him, which is a very strange and creepy story. But nonetheless, sleep paralysis, I'm sure many of you have had experiences and have your own conclusions as to what it was. Now, the first time I ever heard about it, I must have been young. I don't even remember the first time I heard about it, but I grew up in a religious household, mostly Catholic and Christian. But the Christian side of my family heavily believed in the idea of demons and stuff like that. So I grew up believing in demons and ghosts, and it played a huge role in how I would view the world spiritually. And to this day, it still plays a huge role in how I view things. And I try to not let it affect me because it can be damaging, to your mental health, to view things as such, with like demons and whatever. But I don't remember the first time I had a sleep paralysis attack. But again, it must have been young because all throughout my life I've had them. And after doing this research for this presentation, I kind of feel a bit relieved because it kind of all makes sense now, and we'll get into that. So for today's presentation, I used probably about 5 or so different sources, all coming from scientific, journals, doctors, and stuff like that. So I'm going to just move through those, and then we'll get to the stories. All right, so the term sleep paralysis was coined by Samuel Alexander Kinnear Wilson, an American-born British neurologist in the early 1900s. And the first known description of sleep paralysis came from Hippocrates, 400 BC, and the Greeks named it ephialtes, roughly translated as to pounce upon someone. Again, that is ephialtes. Artemidorus of Daldes, 2nd century, in his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, associated ephialtes with the god Pan. And it was said that sometimes Pan would have sex with you during an ephialtes or a sleep paralysis. But back then, a lot of people viewed this as a promise of great future income. Kind of weird, but all right. So this positive link with the sexual act would eventually change with the arrival of the Christian era of the Middle Ages. The incubi and the succubi, demons who sexually harassed their victims at night, would then emerge out of this Christian era, kind of flipping it around. And the Latin name incubus would initially be a direct translation of ephialtes, which again means, someone pouncing upon you, or to pounce upon someone. Which makes sense because a lot of times when you're in that state, you feel like a weight is on you or something's on you. A lot of people report when they're able to open their eyes during an attack, a sleep paralysis attack, that they will see a face or something there. Actually, quick story before we go into some further information. I just remembered this one. Back in the day, my best friend was living with me in my parents' house when we were like 19. And he told me that one time he woke up during the night. Well, he said he was actually experimenting and wanted to induce a sleep paralysis. And he read somewhere or heard somewhere that in an old Chinese legend or tradition, it was said that if you were to sleep on the opposite side of your bed, that you would encounter a demon or you would go into sleep paralysis. So it was bad luck to sleep on the foot of your bed. And so he did just that, just to mess around. And he said that it worked. And that when he opened his eyes, he saw a little creepy creature just staring right at him. And he was paralyzed for a moment, and then it all just went away. But as we'll see in this information, it could have been his mind, tricking him, a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I just thought that was creepy. All right, so coming from, I'm guessing, a doctor named Dan Dennis in an article for Nature of Science and Sleep from 2018. He says, in a study of over 8,000 participants where diagnosis was established via a computer program, those with severe sleep paralysis, defined as at least one episode per week, were found to have higher rates of insomnia. While little evidence has found significantly higher rates of sleep paralysis in those with an insomnia disorder, as seen previously, some research has found that increased insomnia symptoms in otherwise healthy individuals does show a link to sleep paralysis. In the most comprehensive examination of sleep paralysis in multiple sleep disorders to date, participants who had experienced sleep paralysis were found to have higher rates of circadian rhythm disorder, psychophysiologic insomnia, OSA, periodic limb movement disorder, narcolepsy, confusional arousals, nocturnal leg cramps, sleep starts, also known as hypnic or hypnagogic jerks, sudden, brief, and strong contractions of the body, or one or more body segments that occur when falling asleep, and sleep talking. However, in a multiple predictor model, where the various contributions of multiple different factors to the presence of sleep paralysis was assessed, the only sleep disorder to independently predict sleep paralysis was nocturnal leg cramps. So that's a lot to take in there, but basically, all these different factors kind of help or play a role in inducing sleep paralysis. And as the study says, the only one that can predict sleep paralysis out of all of those, for whatever weird reason, is nocturnal leg cramps. All right, carrying on. So from Bilal Jalal in Scientific American in 2020, we read that, in fact, me and my colleagues' research, that is Bilal Jalal's, conducted over roughly a decade in 6 different countries, suggests that beliefs about sleep paralysis can dramatically shape the physical and psychological experience, revealing a striking type of mind-body interaction. Sleep paralysis is caused by what appears to be a basic brain glitch at the interface between wakefulness and rapid eye movement, REM sleep. During REM or REM, you have intensely lifelike dreams. To prevent you from acting out those realistic dreams and hurting yourself, your brain has a clever solution. It temporarily paralyzes your entire body. Indeed, your brain has a switch, a handful of neurochemicals that tilts you between sleep and wakefulness. Sometimes the switch fails, However, your brain inadvertently wakes up while your body is still under the spell of REM paralysis, leaving you stuck in a paradoxical state between parallel realities, wakefulness and REM sleep. During sleep paralysis, the crisp dreams of REM spill over into waking consciousness, like a dream coming alive before your eyes, fanged figures and all. All right, so I really liked that piece of information, or the previous, section of it, because it kind of makes sense now. I vaguely remember my cousins and my siblings telling me a story about me sleepwalking when I was like 7 years old. It could have been a joke. I don't know. They said that they found me in the kitchen peeing um, on the cereal box in the kitchen or something like that. I don't know. But I've always had a weird relationship with sleep, and a really weird one, actually, kind of embarrassing to admit. But I was a bedwetter for many years, up until probably for like 3 years of my life, from what I remember. It was probably from like I want to say like 6 or 7 to as late as like 10, and a couple of spotty episodes after that. And I don't know what that was about. Only thing that I know is that, and I learned this in my language arts class. I remember, I forgot who it was, but there was a famous like fictional writer or poet or something who was also a bedwetter and used to get beat by the nuns in the Catholic school that he was in for doing so. But there have been some weird tests or statistics that show that children who wet the bed have higher, I guess, results in genius-like activity. Not to compare myself with anybody in that category, but there's just weird correlations with wetting the bed and weird artistic successes. But it was more than that. I also had these weird like episodes of seeing things. And there was this one time, or this went on for like a couple weeks, where I'd be falling asleep in this house that we lived in at the time. I was about 7 or 8, and I'd be staring out at the big glass window right behind my bed, and far away, on the other side of the street from that window, I would see this bush. And for some weird reason, I convinced myself that that bush was dancing and making fun of me. And I would freak out, and I would like yell and cry and be like, the bush, it's dancing, it's making fun of me. And my siblings, I shared a room at the time with 2 of my siblings, and they were just like, what the heck, dude? Like, just go to sleep, And I remember my dad having to come in and calm me down and be like, he probably was looking at me like, what the hell's going on with this kid? Like, I'm here crying like the bush is dancing, it's making fun of me. So my parents probably thought I was going fucking crazy and that I was going to end up being some psychopath or something. But luckily that went away. I don't know what that was about. I had a lot of weird instances like that all throughout my childhood where looking back on it, it was really more of just me convincing myself, playing tricks on my own mind. And I attribute that to a lot of the weird demonology that I grew up believing in, and also exposing myself to just fucked up movies as a kid. I watched the Exorcist, the original Exorcist, when I was like 7 years old by myself in a dark room, which is crazy. I don't know why anybody would want to do that, let alone at 7 years old. So I grew up loving horror movies, and I grew up being fascinated by demons and stuff like that because of the religion. But I am not like that anymore. I don't like watching scary movies for that reason. I just think it's like eating, what you feed your body and what you feed your mind is very important. But yeah, so that makes sense because I've had a lot of sleep paralysis episodes later on in life. And a lot of these things that this study attributes it to kind of makes sense for me. So it says like, where was it here? Okay, yeah. So leg cramps or sleep starts, like when you get those jerks, like when you fall down and you jerk in your bed. I get both of those a lot, like these weird leg spasms and those sleep starts, as they're called. I get those a lot. I've always had those. And sleep talking is a big one. I'll laugh or I'll mumble in my sleep. So I don't know, like I think all just the trauma that I experienced mentally as a kid with all this craziness of demonology and watching scary movies, and also just other real life things that I've gone through that I don't need to go into right now. I think all of that kind of surfaced later on in my life as sleep paralysis. At one point in my life, I believed it was demons and stuff like that, and hey, it could be, but we're gonna get into some more of this information, and then I'll get into some more stories. So going back to Balan Jalal in Scientific American from 2020, he says that those who attributed it to supernatural forces, sleep paralysis, suffered greater fear of the experience and longer paralysis. Sleep paralysis had gone from a simple brain glitch to a chronic, prolonged, and potentially fatal supernatural event. Our new findings raise the intriguing possibility that sleep paralysis, if accompanied by certain beliefs, is not just frightening, but may also be potentially traumatizing. The effects can linger long after an episode ends. Wow, yeah, so going back to what I was just talking about, it's like you play these tricks on yourself, But as the previous passage mentioned, sleep paralysis is basically your brain's way of protecting you from acting out the crazy and intense things that are going on in your sleep. That's why you wave your arms around sometimes, or you're jerking around, or some people even get up and walk around, or you're talking, or you're yelling. There are cases where people have killed their significant other during a sleep episode of intense dreams. So sleep paralyzation is your brain's way of paralyzing you and just keeping you asleep, keeping you in bed instead of acting these things out. But the intense and scary experience that we call sleep paralyzation is when we are awake during or in between that paralyzed state of REM sleep and wakefulness consciousness. So in that in between hypnagogic state, that's what we call sleep paralyzation. It's where we're experiencing the paralyzation in waking consciousness. It'd be like a doctor putting you under to do some surgery, and then you wake up while you're under. That'd be pretty frightening, to see what's going on without being able to move your body. So it's basically the same thing. It's a good thing, that the doctor's doing to you or for you, in the same way that your brain is doing that for you. And of course, when you wake up in that paralyzed state and you're in that hypnagogic state of being half asleep, half awake, you're freaking out. Why can't I move my body? And then that's when all the cultural, effects start to kick in, and you start to tell yourself it's a demon, it's this and it's that. And it just gets crazy from there. All right, so in another article with information from Alicia Roth with a PhD from online source Health Essentials, we find that she says stress and other factors may not be a direct cause of these events, but that they can certainly play a factor in disrupting your sleep and making you more susceptible to having these experiences. And she also says, when I work with patients, many of them are going through other sleep issues like insomnia, or they're not sleeping well in general. She says they're stressed or anxious about other things going on in life, and that throws everything off. If you're having these hypnagogic hallucinations as you transition from being awake to asleep, consider what you're consuming before bedtime. She says you need to turn off the news by 9 p.m. and you need to get away from social media by a certain time. All right, so that's pretty useful information. If you're more stressed out or you're not sleeping well, you're pretty much giving yourself a higher chance of breaking that chain of being asleep or awake and inducing sleep paralyzation because your brain's just all over the place. But I thought it was interesting that she said, you need to be healthy and turn social media and the news off, before you go to bed, significantly before you go to bed, because all those worries and stresses might cause your brain to kick on, in a fight or flight mode or something while you're trying to fall asleep, and then cause this paralyzed state to happen. On a more conspiratorial level, if you want to go there into the rabbit hole, we could even say, that social media and the news and all this fear mongering is trying to get these sleep paralyzation demons to attack you. But that's only if you want to go there. And I don't think I do. All right, so in our last article, we'll be quoting from Jose de Sa and Sergio Motarolim from an article posted in Frontiers in Psychology in 2016. Okay, so according to them, sleep paralyzation is considered a disease, parasomnia, where recurrent and or associated emotional burden occurs. Canadian Eskimos attribute sleep paralysis to spells of shamans who hinder the ability to move and provoke hallucinations of a shapeless presence. In the Japanese tradition, sleep paralyzation is due to a vengeful spirit who suffocates his enemies while sleeping. In Nigerian culture, a female demon attacks during dreaming and provokes paralysis. A modern manifestation of sleep paralysis is the report of alien abductions. The pisadeira, a character of Brazilian folklore originating in the country's southeast, is described as a crone with long fingernails who lurks on roofs at night and tramples on the chest of those who sleep on a full stomach with the belly up. That's kind of weird. It's like, damn, dude, you're going to come for me just because I had a full meal? That's pretty whack. Yeah, but anyway, so sleep paralysis occurs mostly in women and when people sleep in the supine position. The supine position is basically when you're on your back facing straight up. And that's interesting because I was actually warned as a kid by my, again, Christian family not to sleep in that position, specifically with my hands held in like a pharaoh way, like how they bury the pharaohs with their hands crossed on over their chest. I was always told not to sleep that way. And sometimes when I'm just feeling edgy, I'll do it just to like see what happens. But that's interesting that for some reason sleeping like that, with your back, on your back facing up, would induce it more. It's probably got something to do with like blood flow or something. Okay, so in early enlightenment, with the beginning of scientific revolution, there is what appears to be the first medical description of an sleep paralysis episode, accompanied by hypnagogic hallucinations. Dr. Isbrand von Dijmerbroek, 1609 to 1674, diagnosed a 50-year-old woman suffering from repeated spells caused by a nightmare or incubus. Henry Fuseli depicted the overlap between nightmare and sleep paralyzation in his most famous painting, The Nightmare, from 1781. You've probably seen it. It's pretty creepy. It's just like this woman drenched over her bed and this weird little creature sitting on her looking at you, and then some black horse randomly in the background peeping through some like curtains and just like wildly staring in awe or shock of the little demon. But nonetheless, in Mexico, sleep paralyzation is known as Se me subió el muerto, translated as a dead body climbed on top of me. Interesting. In Catalonia, the pesanta is a black animal, usually a dog or a cat, that invades houses at night and steps over people's chests, disturbing their breath and causing nightmares. All right, so that's all the basic, medical information. At this point, I'm just gonna wrap it up and tell you some stories and see what you think. All right, so the first story is a story that I heard from an interview of Prodigy from Mobb Deep. For those of you who don't know, Mobb Deep is a famous 90s hip hop group, pioneering hip hop group. And Prodigy is a very interesting guy. And this was a very eye opening interview. It's on a channel called The Therapist. Really cool. He interviews a lot of celebrities and gets really deep about their past traumas. And Prodigy's an interesting guy because he's one of the first people, well, he's actually the first person in hip hop, in mainstream hip hop, to mention the Illuminati. He's got the famous line, Illuminati want my mind, soul, and my body. Secret society trying to keep an eye on me. Yeah, that was him. But he's an interesting guy. Towards the end of his life, he really spoke more about the Illuminati, and his last album was called The Hegelian Dialectic. And it was all about exposing the Illuminati, and also about spirituality. And then he just mysteriously passed away. But all his life, he dealt with sickle cell, which was a very, very painful disease. But in this interview, he talks about various experiences with the paranormal. He talks about praying to God with his wife to be shown signs, and that same night he sees a huge UFO just fly over the hood, and talks about this weird Jesus-like dude walking around the hood, walking around the projects looking for him and leaving a message with one of his roommates. But what is interesting and specific to this topic is he talks about one night he woke up, I'm guessing in a sort of sleep paralyzation state, and saw what he described as a lanky black Spider-Man. He said that's the best way he could describe it. Just imagine Spider-Man and how he looks and how he moves, but it was all black, and it just walked lankily across his room. And he said in the interview that he felt like this thing allowed him to see it, like it showed itself deliberately to him. And he knew at that point that, these things exist, they're out there. And of course, he's one out of millions, probably billions of people who have witnessed these things. And I myself have, so that could be a factor in this whole sleep paralyzation thing, where we're basically at that crux of our world and their world. That's what the medical information is basically getting at, is we're in a state, that hypnagogic state, where we are in between our world and the dream world, or the other side, if you will. Okay, so my story, well, the most impactful one, I would say, because I've had a lot of them, but some of them are just whatever, minor. But this one is the most impactful for me. And because it happened to not just me, but my wife next to me the same morning. And admittedly, the night before, we had a pretty wild night, which I think had a part to play in this. And I don't need to get into detail, but it was a wild, just night of partying. I'll leave it at that. But while we were partying, opening ourselves up to influences with drugs and alcohol and sexual licentiousness, I remember, again, being edgy and kind of wanting to experiment, kind of almost summoning something, or trying to summon something in that moment. I was going through some crazy stuff at that time in my life. That time period, I lived in a cabin. We lived in a cabin up in a mountain right across from a lake. There was just a high energy there, and in that particular time in my life, I experimented a lot with very basic, I guess you can call dark magic, just very basic stuff, you know. And so in the mix of that partying, there was a moment where I utilized the energy to see if I could contact something. And it wasn't like I drew a fucking pentagram or shit like that. No, it was literally just I was in the moment, the partying was going on, and I just sat there with an intention and vibrated with that intention. So comes the next morning, um, I'm in that state, that sleep paralyzation state, and I hear this voice, this very fuzzy, staticky voice, just repeating over and over. I am the one you don't know about. I am the one you don't know about. Which was really weird. And it was like a very staticky, angry voice. Like literally like if it was being like said through like an old telephone that was like cutting out. And as that was happening, my wife was actually barely awake, and she saw me, as she told me later, like jolting around, basically having like a mini seizure. And but she didn't think much of it, because I do weird things in my sleep anyway. Like I mentioned, I jerk around a lot, I mumble and stuff like that. And so she kind of fell back asleep. And then the thing, must have jumped to her or something, because then she had an episode immediately after that where in her episode, whatever it was told her in an angry voice that she needed to get rid of our dream catcher that was right above our bed, which was really weird, and it's confusing because we both grew up in a Christian home, and Christians will tell you that dream catchers are evil, but obviously natives will tell you that they're good. I mean, that's the use of them, is for good. So I just thought it was interesting that whatever it was wanted us to angrily take it down. So that's probably, and so we woke up, and then later that morning we told ourselves, we told each other the stories, and then we were kind of like shocked, like, whoa, what the heck, what just happened? But that was the most impactful story for me, at least, and hopefully will be the last one. I mean, I've had episodes after that, but now I'm more I kind of just play things up as medical at this point, because I don't want to deal with the implications of it being spiritual, at least right now, because I don't got time for that. I don't have time to be dealing with demons and shit like that. I grew up with that. I grew up in that mind frame, so I know what it can do to you. And I've seen people, my really close friends, who have just seen every little thing as a spiritual attack, and it has literally drove a couple of them insane, like literally like diagnosed schizophrenic. So you got to be careful. Sometimes you just got to play it up as what, I'm just tired, or I'm just, it's just my mind, and fight the war, fight the spiritual war, through bravery and through just confidence. You, like, I got this friend, right, who's super into paranormal stuff. He creeps himself out. He loves to creep himself out. He watches crazy, crazy, creepy videos at like 3 a.m. He loves doing it. But again, he's always living in an anxious state, in a fearful state. And he's a Christ believer. And he's always telling me, yo, man, when you're doing your esoteric work, man, you need to be careful. You should wear a cross, this, and that. And I'm like, bro, I don't need to wear a cross. Christ is in my heart. My heart is the cross. So a person who's dealt with this pretty much the first quarter of their life, my advice or my tactic now for battling these things is, one, confidence, holding your heart high with good energy. And just realizing sometimes your brain does funky stuff. You ain't got to worry about it. You know, work out, eat good. All right, last story. This one is freaky for sure. So, I'm the youngest of four, one sister, two brothers. And the second brother, not the oldest, but the second oldest, he's gone through a lot of craziness in his life. Just so many stories, endless stories. He's probably the most sporadic out of us all. You know, a lot of time in the system, you know, in the jail systems, a lot of time in the streets, a lot of experiences with drugs and psychedelics. He's a tripper, good guy, really good-hearted guy, but he's just been through a lot. And at this particular time in our life, when the story took place, we were both going through some tough times, really tough times. I not to get too deep, but you know, my relationship was broken at the time, so I was back at my parents' house. Just a story for a whole nother podcast, or you know. But anyways, me and him were back at our parents' house. That's what I'm trying to get at. Me and him were back at our parents' house, you know, temporarily trying to figure ourselves out. And we would you know, alternate the guest room. You know, sometimes I would sleep in the guest room and he'd get the couch, or vice versa. Kind of just depended on who got there first or whatever the situation was. So this one night I had the bed. I'm going to sleep. You know, I have work the next day. And as I'm falling asleep, I can hear my brother rummaging in the front yard and kind of running and huffing and puffing to the door and just saying out loud, "What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?" Loud. I mean, this is like 11:30, almost midnight, and my parents are asleep, and it's being all loud and obnoxious. You know, opens the door really fast, jingling the keys, and then shuts the door crazy loud, and then runs to the room where I'm in, opens the door, just jumps on the bed, and just like, "Yo, can I sleep with you? Can I sleep with you?" And I'm just like, "What the," you know, just like kind of annoyed at that point, because I'm trying to go to bed because I have work, and I don't want to have to share the bed with my older brother. I mean, it's not like it's weird, but it's like, damn, dude, like we're two big sweaty dudes, like this is gonna be uncomfortable, but sure, you know. But I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm like, yeah, I told him, yeah, go ahead, man. But I'm just trying to sleep, you know. He's like, no, it's all good. So he's like freaking out, like huffing and puffing. I don't even want to ask him what happened, you know, because again, he's been through a lot, and you know, me and him have a certain relationship. So I'm just like, okay, he's it's another one of those things, you know. I don't know. I don't know what he's up to. I don't even want to know. And he's always been a heavy sleeper. And again, that's probably a factor in what has happened with him throughout the years with sleep paralyzation and this specific story. But he is a heavy sleeper. I am the opposite. I come from a different survival based mind. Like the drop of a pen, I'm up, fist in the air. But he falls asleep really fast after doing all that craziness, and then just has this weird like paralyzation seizure attack where it's like out of the Exorcist movie. You know, he's next to me and he's laying belly down. Okay, imagine this, belly down, and then starts flopping up and down. You know how hard that is to do, and how, you know, bad that is for your back. He's belly down, flopping the upper half of his body up and down violently, with his hands contorted behind his back like he's getting arrested. You know, and just saying, just over and over saying, "No, no, please don't." And I'm just there like, I'm just freaking out, you know, because I grew up with like demons and The Exorcist and all this shit as a kid. So here I am with somebody possibly demonly possessed right next to me in the middle of the night, and contorting and doing all this craziness, and obviously possessed by something or disturbed by something, because he's just going up and down saying, "No, no, please don't." And so I'm like freaking out. I froze for a minute, to be honest. I froze. I'm like, what the fuck do I do? And then so I mustered up the courage to like slide out of the bed. And at that point, I didn't know if it was a seizure or not. So I didn't want to like try and touch him and like make it worse. So I just kind of like watched him for a moment, like, what's going on? And he kind of slowed down, but he would still like moving around heavily and just kept saying no, and was like obviously distressed. So I was freaked out. So I actually left at the house. I left the building. I checked out. I was like, nah, I'm out of here. So I literally left the building and I called my cousin who's really close to me and my brother, but really close to my brother and them two have had a lot of experiences together on the streets. So I figured he had some better information on how to handle this. Was it an overdose? Is he overdosing? What do I do? So I called my cousin, wake his ass up in the middle of the night. I'm like freaking out. I'm like, yo, like, I think my brother's having a seizure. What do I do? And my cousin's just all like, bro, like, wake your parents up. I don't know why you waking me up. I'm like, all right, fair enough. So I go back in and I check up on him, and he seems to be kind of calming down, still kind of tossing and turning. I'm like, all right, he's breathing, he's not turning purple, he looks good. But all in all, basically we decided to just let him be because we don't want to call the ambulance or anybody because it could possibly throw him back in jail because he was on probation at the time. So my job was to freaking watch him, get up every 10 minutes and go look at him and make sure he's breathing and not turning purple. So after about half an hour, I'm like, all right, he's calmed down, he's gone to sleep. But throughout that whole time, there was just this dark energy over the room. Now, this is where it gets really weird. So remember in the beginning of the story, he was running into the house, freaking out, saying, what the fuck was that? What the fuck was that? I learned why a couple days after. I didn't want to ask him about that right away, so I waited until things calmed down. And a few days later, I asked him, yo, like, what was up with that night? What happened? And then he's like, oh, damn, dude, like, it all came rushing back to him. And, admittedly, he was high on the drugs he was using at the time. And he was outside in front of the house smoking a cigarette, just puffing the cigarette. And he thought he was having a conversation with me for like half an hour. So apparently I was out there in the dark with him conversating. And then he looks up at one point and realizes it's not me, or I guess it shapeshifted into its real form. And he describes what he saw was just this ugly creature. And my brother froze, and then the ugly creature just ran, like literally ran on its feet, like away. And my brother, in his high mind, for some reason kind of felt like, wait, was that Eddie? So he was like confused and freaked out. So he ran after it, kind of still thinking it's me, like, yo, Eddie, why are you running away? And then he says that the creature jumped up and then grew wings and then just flew off into the night sky. And at that point, he obviously knew it was not me. So that's when he turned around, and then that's when he ran to the house and started making all that noise, screaming, what the fuck was that? What the fuck was that? So yeah, that's cool. That was great to know that I was chilling right there while all that was happening. But I don't know what to make of that, So, but he's doing good now. He's chilling. We're all chilling. A lot can happen, man, to your brain, to your mind, to your body when you put it under vulnerable conditions. So, I don't know. Tell me what y'all think sleep paralyzation is. Tell me your craziest story. Comment, like, subscribe, share this. Hope you had a good time hanging out. Till the next one, peace.